Today, what if your addiction isn't about the substance at all, but about the connection you never got? Welcome to Sacred Grit, a podcast equipping men to conquer addiction and overcome inner struggles through physical, mental, and spiritual disciplines so you can become a man of honor and integrity. I'm Jason Lyle. Now let's get to work. Today you'll learn addiction isn't about pleasure, it's about connection. You can't connect to God until you connect to yourself. No one's coming to save you, and that's good news. This episode is brought to you by David Dodd and Edward Jones McDonough. What's up, my dude? Welcome back to the Sacred Grit podcast. So we've been talking a good bit. We're kind of heading in a direction, just so you know, for the holidays, because that's, the holidays are tough on folks who struggle with addiction. So we're kind of headed in that direction. And today I really want to talk about your addiction and kind of its root, right? Like, why are you addicted to begin with? And so to let the cat out of the bag immediately, addiction is about connection and intimate, secure connection. So just let me kind of share with you my story. I was adopted at birth, and that kind of became the story of my life. Kind of this child left behind to take care of himself. And I've spent the rest of my life trying to get back to that connection. Now, I didn't really understand that early on. I mean, growing up, if someone would have said, does your adoption bother you? I'd have absolutely said no. But one day I'm sitting in my therapist's office and just kind of unpacking sex addiction and my behaviors and my adoption kind of would come up in passing. And I just remember my therapist slides his glasses off and just looks at me and goes, Jason, maybe it's worth considering that since you came out of a woman, you've been trying to get back inside of a woman. And maybe that's the last place you felt safe was inside of a woman. So you want to get back there. And dude, it was like a light came on. And I don't know how to explain that exactly, but it was just one of those lights that I knew was right. It's like I knew that somehow that event impacted me and it was driving these behaviors that I didn't want to have. And it was strange to say that an event I couldn't recall was impacting my current decision. But I mean, it turns out there's more than one way to remember something. But it became clearer that my addiction had stemmed from my need for connection. And it turns out there's a ton of truth in that statement, because that day I realized that my addiction wasn't about pleasure. It was about connection. And every addiction is an attempt to come home. And you probably felt this in a smaller level at some point in your life. Maybe, there was a death or the loss of a connection, and it sent you into a spiral of bad behaviors and bad decisions that cost you in the long run. And that loss of connection produced new behaviors that you wish you didn't have, right? So, think about things like you lose someone and you start to grieve, and that maybe that's death, or maybe that's through a breakup, or maybe that's through they relocated, right? And then you just have these things like you might overeat, you might overdrink, but then when that connection's lost, we crave to have something back in that space, right? That's where the rebound comes from. People break up like, I'm having this rebound. Right. But it turns out that the opposite of addiction is connection. And maybe this explains why people who start going to meetings or going to church, once they hit rock bottom in addiction, they have their best chance at recovery, because in that connection, they find what they've been looking for. And science kind of backs this up, right? You can look up some of Gabriel Mate's stuff. He talks about this in a couple of YouTube videos he posted. But when a baby's first bond is broken or inconsistent, the brain learns to soothe itself with something else, right? So anything could disrupt that bond, right? Postpartum depression, premature birth, or even just an emotionally unavailable parent. It becomes easier for the child to attach to something else to get the chemical release that child wants, that it would normally feel bonding with the parent. Now, if you add to that any sort of a traumatic childhood experience, there's a recipe for addiction. But the good news is you can reconnect and you can find the connection and the healing that you're looking for, but you have to learn a few things first. And we'll talk about those on Gritty Wednesday. But for now, I want you to connect to something deeper than another human. I want you to connect to yourself, my dude. Now, the 12 steps talk about a higher power, but most men don't realize that power has to become internal. right? You can't connect to God until you connect to yourself, and you can't connect yourself until you learn to stay with your own pain long enough to heal it. And I would argue that if that connection's not in place in some way, that connection to ourselves, then we cannot connect to our true self and probably not connect to anyone else for that matter. So we can't, if we've not connected to God in and of ourselves, we can't really connect to anyone. And our connection to God makes us feel secure in ourselves and therefore connected to ourselves. And therefore our connection to others is not dependent on anything other than ourselves, right? So think about that for just a minute. If I'm always looking for external validation for an internal response, I'm always dependent on an external thing, whether that's a person or a substance or anything else. So what I'm talking about is accessing an internal thing so that you can control an internal response. And that internal thing is the true you or the divine in you, right? But there's a lot of work to do so we can get there. So for now, like, grab your journal. And here's what I want you to think about. You pause this, grab a journal, or maybe replay it when you get home. Note what time we're at so you can get back to it pretty easy. But on the player, I mean. So here's what I want you to think about. Who showed you in your life what power and connection looked like when you were a child? And I don't only mean the things you can remember, but also things you can't. Like, you might need a story about your childhood to remember this or recall this or to think of where this space may have happened, right? You might find out you were premature. You might find out that you had something that made you stay in the hospital while your brain was developing. Or you might remember that your mom or dad were an alcoholic when you were a baby and they hadn't recovered. Or there could be a million things that caused that connection, but I want you to think about that, because the way I tie my idea of power and connection is that it cannot be trusted, right? That's mine. That's what I'm saying. So the way that I tied that idea, because, my biological mother gave me away, is that connection cannot be trusted. It will leave me when I need it the most. So I moved that same idea over to God and decided that what I needed to do was learn all I could about God in order to have a relationship with God. So, I thought maybe if I fostered my relationship to God through understanding, then God would love me enough to help me. So think about that. So I got this adoption, my mother, who had power over me, kind of was not there when I needed her. So I moved through life with this idea about power, like when you need it, it won't be there. And so I just started learning more and more and more and more about God. I understood love as something that could be known, but it's not. It's something that can only be experienced. See, I thought God could save me from my addiction if I could just figure out the combination, right? Like spinning a combination. But it couldn't. Only I could save me. All the answers are in me, and all the answers are also in you, my dude. So who was it? And what lie have you chosen to believe about your higher power? Because, my man, that lie is key to you getting out. I had to stop believing that someone somewhere else was coming to save me, and that the only one who can save me is in me, and it is in my next decision. Now, this is important and a step you can't overlook, because as long as you have a wrong view of power and connection, you will also have a wrong expectation of power and connection. And the wrong expectation of power and connection is what got you here to begin with. Listen, man, no one is coming to save you, but that is amazing news, because the man who does save you is already inside of you. Every decision you make in love toward yourself is a step toward God and a step away from addiction. So here's the thing about this type of work. I believe if every man started to believe that the only one that can help him is him, and that true connection begins inside himself, because if he can't take that true connection to himself out into the world, then the world really can't connect to him. Then he can become a man fully alive, and the world needs men fully alive, right? I believe that if men everywhere just start doing this work of looking inside and going, how do I connect to me? How do I learn how to trust me? How do I learn that inside of me lies every single thing I need? If we did that, my dude, we become powerful men of sacred grit. So today you learned addiction isn't about pleasure, it's about connection. You can't connect to God until you connect to yourself, and no one's coming to save you, and that's good news. My dude, thank you so much for listening. I appreciate you listening and supporting by listening and sharing with other people. If you drop down in the show notes, you'll see my Calendly link there. You can book a consultation call. Would love to see if we are a fit. All right. My closing sponsor today is Oak Haven Diagnostics. Jody Morgan and his wife Jenny, they run Oak Haven Diagnostics, and is where you order your gear to take blood from your cattle. You send it back into them, and they tell you if your cattle are pregnant or not. And I think they can even pinpoint due dates, man. It's pretty wild. It's a cutting-edge farming technology with my main man, Jody Morgan. You can find them at oakhavendiagnostics.com. All right, my dude. I will see you on Gritty Wednesday.